Welcome back to the channel. This is part 8, looking at the distributor on the E93A engine. You can see here, this is the one on my test rig. And here on the table I have a full selection of parts for at least one distributor and many parts for a second distributor. The plan is to take the best parts and put together one good one and then ultimately put it onto this test rig and check that it works. So putting together this distributor, I'm going to be using the manual, and it's got a really good exploded view, and the parts list describes all the parts. So let's get started. Firstly, there are some important dimensions that are listed in the manual, and that's the dimensions of the bores of the bushes. There's 2 bushes in there, one at the top and one at the bottom with a space in the middle as a dimension for those. And ultimately there's a dimension for the shaft that goes into those bushes, looking for clearance and wear on those, replace the bushes if need be. In this case I'm not going to do so because I haven't got any. So I'll pop some light oil on there, dropped it in, and it spins nicely. There's not really any play at all. It doesn't clickety-clack from side to side, so I'm going to go with that. So we're going to build this piece up outside first and then ultimately pop it into there at the end. Right, so put in the weights on the counterweights for the centrifugal advance. There's a couple of washers goes on first, both brass washers. And then the weights, I've got a pin on and a little pin there, so effectively one sits there like that, and the other one sits in a similar mode, that one there like that. They slot into the holes, and obviously as it spins round these fly out against the springs and change the advance, increase the advance. The springs are different. I thought that was wrong to begin with, but on the pictures they do have a different type of spring on each one. Now the manual says it's important that you get these springs in the right little holes on those cams. You can see there that the springs are attached to the inner holes, or sometimes they've got slots, and I guess it self-rights itself. So once the weights are on, you've got to put this little cam top, and this is the cam on which the points ride. As you can see there, a couple of pins, couple of holes. You've got to line those pins up with the holes in those little brass weights. One's in there, both in there. And then basically, as this spins faster and faster, it forces the weights out, and it effectively changes the timing slightly of the cam, moving it round. So the next stage is to build up the plate that the contact points sit on. So there's 2 plates. This one's a bit corroded. I noticed that says 10 degrees and 10 on there. We're going to go with this plate. And these are all the parts that are going to fit onto it. First stage is to put the plate on, and obviously it goes over that little pin there. And then there's a couple of holes where these 2 screws go in. So once the contact breaker plate is installed there, you need to isolate electrically this from the actual contact breaker spring. So it requires one of these little sort of fiber washers that pops on there, and then you put the contact breaker points on top. So the next stage is you need to electrically isolate this springy section from the base plate, and it uses this little L-shaped piece here, and it fits in there, and then that screw goes through there, and then that plastic piece goes on the outside, and that electrically separates the 2. Like that. And then a couple of washers go on next. And this is where we also need to put in this piece here, which is off the condenser. I'm going to do that later, so I'm just going to leave that for the time being. I've popped the 1 nut on there just to keep it all together, but ultimately there's a second nut that goes on because you've got to connect this to the coil as well as to the condenser below. So do that in a bit. So the next stage is to put one of these, again, fibre washers that sits in there. It is a sort of a spacer, and then we can put this in. It's now sitting on that washer. And then if you notice there's a hole there and a hole there, well, those two holes are for that screw to fit into and that screw to fit into, so that the plate sits in there with the screws coming in from the outside. Right, so that's that all put together, and you can maybe just about see that. If I zoom in, maybe, as this rotates, the contact points pop open and closed. Haven't set the gap yet. So next stage is to fit the condenser, which goes into that hole there. Condenser fits in the hole, and then the wire comes up and connects to the post. That's the condenser wire connected and tightened up. There's a nut on there to tighten, then a retaining screw for the condenser into there. So I'll do that. That's all done. Screw in place, nut tightened up, wire to the condenser. But I suspect I might need a new condenser. Don't know whether this one works or not. I don't really know how to test it. Probably just have to buy a new one. And then into that hole there, there's a little oiler fits. It's a sort of a, pour a bit of oil in, and it runs and eventually works its way down the shaft. And you need to rotate that so that a little hole's facing upwards, otherwise the oil's going to fall out. You can, that takes a bit of a squeezing with a pair of pliers. When this goes into the vehicle, this extension shaft fits on it. You can see if you put it on the wrong way, it doesn't line up. You can see that it only goes on one way, so the shaft lines up. And the other end, this is connected into the camshaft, and then pointing up the way and pointing out. So a locking device. There's another one of these. Again, it's not quite in the center. It only goes on one way, so that when that's locked in place, that rotates. And then the distributor is sitting in the top of there. And you've got to get this piece right. There's two different versions. I think there's a 1.9 inch and a 2 inch. Get the wrong version, obviously it won't connect properly. And this is how the whole assembly would look actually in the engine. So this piece here goes into the camshaft, and you've got to get that oriented in the correct way, lined up with the hole in the timing gear at just before top dead center. And then you've got this extension piece, and then the distributor slots into that extension piece only one way, like that. So the whole thing basically spins from this here. So the final stage in getting this set up is to get rid of that free play, and that is got rid of by this piece here, which goes over there, and then as a pin goes through there that's peened over, but you need to get rid of the free play. Should be 0 free play according to the instructions. You can see that. So I need to put shim washers into there to remove the free play. So I've got this drill which just fits in, gently tapping into the hole so I can take it out. You can see there's still movement. Zeroed the dial gauge, and you're looking at 0.5 millimeter to 0.55 of a millimeter. So around about 0.5 millimeter of spacers we need to put into there. I have here a series of shims. This one over here is probably not much good because it looks like it's eaten away badly. So I'm going to measure each of those and then build up a pack of around about 0.5 millimeter. Okay, so if you remember, we needed just over 0.5. So we've got 0.23, 0.27, 0.25, 0.15. So I'm just going to use those two. 0.25 and 0.27 is going to give me just over 0.5. I'll pop those in and let's see what the play is. Right, so I've added 0.52. You can remember we were looking for about 0.55, 0.58. And now we've got round about 0.02 to 0.03, push hard, millimeters of play. Well, I don't have a spacer that will do that gap, so that's going to do. It won't make any difference to the timing. Right, well, I've measured that across there because that's the length of pin we need, and it comes up just under 17 millimeters. So if we get a pin that's just over 17 millimeters, that's what we need. That pin there is just about 17, just under. That pin pretty much on, and that pin is slightly longer. So any of those would really do. And we'll use one of those. And there's the basically the finished distributor. Rotor arm to fit, the cap to fit, obviously the leads. So one of the last stages is fitting the two spring clips that hold the cap on, and basically they're just a split pin. So we need to adjust the contact breaker points gap. It says in the book here 10 to 12 thou. Well, there's 12 thou. You can see that. Way too big, so it needs to tighten them up a bit. So 12 and 10. Get those into view. 12, quite tight. You can feel it dragging. 10, nice and loose if we get it in the right angle. So I'm happy with that. Tighten it down. The last stage now is to make sure you've got the bottom slot aligned with the slot in the top cap. Otherwise the timing will be 180 degrees out and you wonder why you can't start the vehicle. So I'm going to check that now. So it says the larger D facing to the left, which it is, and then the slot should be facing me, so that should be right. Timing should be right now. And when you come to install this in the vehicle, typically that connection is at the back. This is this way around. This is the locking device to stop the distributor rotating. And you put that on like that. Typically that way around. And then there's a big fat screw that goes into there. Like that type of screw there. That screws into there. Into the top of the engine to keep it in place. And then you can see here maybe that there are some numbers on here where you can advance and retard A and R and rotate the distributor a little bit. And then when you're happy, you tighten this clamp up here and you lock it in place. Okay, this is the refurbished distributor installed on my test rig. You can't tell the difference, but basically that's the other one put on. Right, let's try and start it with this distributor on. Joke on, ready to go. Wow, that was loud. Anyway, definitely working. Okay, right, that's it. Distributor up and working, spare distributor available. So the next part, I think I'm going to look at a fuel pump, take one of the fuel pumps, dismantle it, refurbish it, talk about it, put it back together. So look forward to seeing you in the next part. Thanks very much.